My presentation is entitled The Role of Genetics in Obesity. I firstly wanted to pose the question, what would you say is the cause of these common diseases? Cancer, autism, multiple sclerosis, AIDS? Would you say it was a lack of willpower or a lack of self-control? Or is it more of an environmental or lifestyle thing? Or are there biological or genetic causes? And when I pose the question like that, I think most of you would agree that it's got these diseases have a biological or genetic cause. But the thing with obesity is that it's different. Everyone has a lot of experience with obesity, and it's often portrayed in the media, and most people have experienced diets or know someone who's overweight, and oftentimes people will have an opinion. And so I just wanted to start with that quick outlook and ask you to listen to this presentation about the genetic causes of obesity with an open mind. Firstly, a quick review of genetics. All cells with a nucleus contain DNA. As you can see in the figure, the nucleus is the darker grey area. Within the nucleus is stored DNA, and this DNA can be transcribed to RNA, which is then translated to protein. And this is the central dogma of molecular biology. It's the proteins that determine our traits and characteristics. For example, if you secrete a hormone, that hormone will be a protein, and some hormones are responsible for growth. So depending on the type of protein hormone or the amount of protein hormone that you secrete, you will grow to a greater or lesser extent, and that will determine your height. So that's how one characteristic, height, is determined. Or another example is the differing pigments that people have in their eyes can lead people to have either blue or brown or green eyes. So essentially, genetic variations within the DNA cause variations in the proteins, which then lead to the different physical traits that we see in every person that we meet. Just briefly to touch on the packaging of DNA, if your DNA was left in the extended double helix form at the top there, then each person's DNA would be able to stretch to and from the sun 300 times. So clearly we need to condense it to some extent, and that's done by wrapping it around histone proteins, and then those histone proteins wrap around themselves to form nucleosomes and eventually are packaged into the chromosomes, which you can see there in the bottom of that figure. Chromosomes come in pairs, and each arm of the chromosome contains one copy of the gene. So almost all genes have two copies in each cell, one on each arm of the chromosome. Furthermore, not all genes are expressed all the time in all cells. You need them in the unraveled DNA helix form to be expressed and turned into proteins. And most of the time, the genes just aren't accessible. They're all packed up inside chromosomes. So you have to go back through the whole wrapping up process in the opposite direction before you can express them. Okay, so some traits are caused by one gene, but most human traits are caused by multiple genes, and those are called polygenic traits. The research has shown that obesity can be either monogenic or polygenic. In a small minority of obese people, there is a single mutation which causes their obesity. Now clearly, this still only manifests itself in environments where there is abundant food. Even with that single mutation, the laws of thermodynamics still apply, so that the amount of energy in has to be greater than the amount of energy out if you are to become obese. Secondly, the majority of obese people do not have a single gene mutation that causes them to be obese, but have a series of variants within their DNA which predispose them to obesity. it should be noted that a single variant such as this, which we call a polygenic variant, will not in itself be enough to cause obesity. But when multiple of these polygenic variants are present within a person's DNA, then they will have a great predisposition to obesity. The breakthrough really in research to do with genetics of obesity came with the obese mice experiment. These are now known as the ob mice, and they lack the hormone leptin. Leptin is the hormone that regulates the sensation of hunger and energy expenditure. And the mouse on the left lacks the ability to produce this hormone and is called the ob mice. No leptin means there is no feeling of fullness and leads to an uncontrolled food intake. And this got me thinking that it's actually amazing that we are able to regulate our body weight. We consume about 1 million calories every year, and yet over the course of a year our weight will barely change, at the most by 5 to 10 pounds. So that means that for every one of the million calories we take in, we burn almost exactly the same number to keep our weight relatively constant. And across the course of a decade, our weight again might only change by 5 or 10 pounds. And that's literally tons of food that is going into our bodies. And we're matching that almost exactly with our energy expenditure. And do you think this is caused by us just being supremely self-controlled and being constantly watchful that we're expending as much energy as we're taking in? No, our body does it for us. And one of the ways that our body self-regulates our body weight is through leptin. Now, leptin is this hormone which is secreted by the fat cells, the adipocytes. So when you have more fat cells, you secrete more leptin. And leptin has two effects. It has a systematic effect and an effect in the brain. Firstly, the systematic effect. Leptin binds to its receptors, and this binding increases the insulin sensitivity of the muscles and the liver. In these tissues, there is then an increased beta oxidation of fatty acids and a decreased TAG synthesis. So essentially, fat stores are mobilized. In the brain, there's a region in the brain known as the hypothalamus. And within the hypothalamus, there's a group of neurons that express appetite-stimulating peptides called NPY and AGRP. Leptin binds to the neurons and inhibits the release of NPY and AGRP, thus repressing the desire to eat. In the opposite situation, under conditions of fasting, the leptin levels will fall and the levels of NPY and AGRP will increase, and then appetite will increase. And that's in healthy individuals who can produce leptin. Leptin deficiency is the most simple cause of obesity, but yet is still very complicated, as can be seen from this flowchart that shows the signalling pathways by which leptin acts. I just wanted to put that up quickly to show that the polygenic causes of obesity are, tenfold more complicated than that and poorly understood at the current time. So once they'd found this mutation in mice, which is called the ob mutation, because there are two copies, they wanted to find the same mutation in humans. If you just quickly look at this picture, you'll see how these recessive mutations are inherited. You can have either dominant or recessive mutations. For recessive mutations, you need both copies of the mutated gene on both arms of the chromosome to be affected. So in the diagram, the child in blue will be affected, whilst the two offspring with half colours will be carriers and the offspring in beige is unaffected. The ob mutation is an example of an autosomal recessive disorder. So to find it in humans, studies were conducted in inbred families with extreme obesity, and using this tactic they were able to find leptin and leptin receptor gene mutations in these families. Polygenic obesity is a predisposition for obesity that's caused by having a number of polygenic variants. It's estimated that there are over 100 genes, each which can have a small effect on body weight. By definition, each polygenic variant will have a higher frequency in obese than in lean individuals. But having a single polygenic variant associated with obesity will not significantly predispose one to obesity. The way that they found these variants was through genome-wide association studies, in which very large samples of people were taken, and the DNA of these people was studied and examined for DNA sequence variations known as SNPs. This method has been used to identify well over 50 SNPs that show an association with obesity. Most of these SNPs were found near to the fat mass and obesity associated gene, or the melanocortin 4 receptor gene, which is part of the leptin signaling pathway. And having one of these SNPs in your DNA is not going to make you obese, and the effects are very small. But if you have multiple SNPs like this within your DNA, then it has been found that you are more likely to have obesity. Across the huge sample sizes of hundreds of thousands of people, those with certain variations within their DNA were found to be more likely to have obesity. And this was a significant correlation. So it's not just a chance thing. So I just thought, so that's the end of my talk. And I hope I've shown that obesity is not just about willpower. There are genetic factors that are at play that make obesity more or less likely depending upon your genetics. Thanks very much.